good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad you could join us for lunch today. I'm Deborah Hughes, and I will be hosting today along with the head of DAS International, Annaberta Oles, Jane. And thank you for attending the webinar with our specialist psychologists, Perlin and Adeline. And they'll be sharing on the topic of understanding how an assessment can support learning, a case study on dyslexia. And at the end of the presentation, we should have a fair amount of time to answer your questions. So click on the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window and type in your questions, and or you can use the chat function if you want to chat away to us. We'll be here to answer your questions. And if we don't get enough time during this session, we will definitely post any outstanding answers on our DAS International website. So let's get started today. I'd like to introduce you to two of our presenters, Perlin and Adeline. Perlin Kang is a senior specialist psychologist and has been at DAS since 2016. She conducts psychoeducational assessments for DAS, and she's also a member of the DAS Research Committee. Adeline Teo is a registered psychologist, and she is currently the lead specialist psychologist at DAS. And she's been conducting psychoeducational assessments for more than 10 years now. Adeline also conducts training and is involved in our DAS research. And also with us today, as usual, we have Annaberta. She's the head of DAS International, and Anna has a wealth of experience in providing specialist support for students with learning differences. And as head of DAS International, she aims to provide a professional service to the SPLD community, both in Singapore and the region. Anna, over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much for this, for your time, really. And to Deb and Adeline, Perlin for making the time to share this lunch hour. So as Deb mentioned, I'm your host, head of DAS International, Annaberta Oles. And our special guests, Ms. Perlin and Ms. Adeline, will bring you today an understanding on how assessments can support learning through a case study. One of the reasons actually why I had decided on this topic, we've been doing this series now for the last 2 years, almost coming to 3 years, right there. Yep. But I wanted to include our psychologists in one of our sessions, because this is really for us where it all starts. And I have found through my interactions with parents in particular, there are a lot of times when they are really quite unsure when I'm talking to them, when they want placement or they want assessments. And I always have the same question, what is an assessment and how is it different from a screening? So that's one of the things which I think Adeline and Perlin will try and give us more insights. And also, should I even be sending my child for an assessment? So we are hoping that through the case study that they'll be sharing, it aims therefore to provide a clearer understanding to all of us. And thank you so much for our overseas participants for joining us. I know time zone and all, but you made the effort. So over to our experts, Perlin and Adeline, who will help to enlighten us. Enjoy.
Thank you, Anna and Deborah, for the introduction. Hi and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us during your lunch hour. I hope you had a great morning so far. Just a very quick introduction. I'm Adeline and I have Perlin here with me as well. We are both registered psychologists working at the Dyslexia Association of Singapore. We're very excited to start today's webinar, which we hope that you will be able to gain some insights as well. So for today's webinar, it's really us wanting to share more about why is a psychoeducational assessment important, because this is a question that's commonly posed to us. So parents and educators, they are often in two minds about whether or not to send their child or student for an assessment for various reasons, right? It could be the cost involved, the fear of labeling the child, or just being unsure what can the assessment do for the child. So that's why we are here today. Through the use of a case study, we want to highlight how we can use the assessment results to support a child's learning. So without further ado, let's get started. Right? Okay, so let's meet Jane. Now, Jane is a primary 3 girl. Her parents are very concerned, because she's not doing well in school. Now, despite extensive support, she performed poorly for her primary 3 year-end examinations. So specifically, she failed her English and obtained borderline passes for Chinese, mathematics, and science. So her school teacher had also informed her parent that they had conducted a screening in school, and results showed that she is at risk of dyslexia. So Jane's parents are at a loss and they do not know what to do. Okay, then they decided to speak to a psychologist who asked for more information and about their concerns. So Jane's parents shared that Jane has an older brother who is actually doing quite well in school. At home, they speak in a mixture of English and Mandarin. And one of Jane's paternal cousins has recently been diagnosed with dyslexia. Now, next. So Jane's parents record that when Jane was in preschool, she struggled to recognize letters of the alphabet. Now, it was only in the middle of her kindergarten 2 year that she was able to recognize and write the letters, although there were still frequent reversal errors, where she would mix up B and D, P and Qs. She also preferred being read to rather than taking a simple book to read on her own, and she was unable to recognize simple short sight words. So upon entering primary school, Jane continues to struggle with reading, spelling, and writing. So her parents notice that she tends to make random guesses at unfamiliar words. While she's able to read 4 or 5 letter words, she struggles to read long sentences. Consequently, she finds it hard to comprehend what she reads. So Jane's parents also noted that, despite given a reduced spelling list in school, where she's only required to learn like 8 out of 12 words, she still performs inconsistently on spelling tests. Occasionally, letter reversals are present in her writing. She's also weak in her writing conventions, where she forgets her capitalization and punctuation rules, and is weak in her grammar as well. Now, although Jane is able to understand science concepts fairly well, she struggles to spell science vocabulary words and is sometimes penalized for this as well. Okay. Now, apart from literacy concerns, Jane's parents also observed that Jane tends to take a longer time to complete her schoolwork and finds it hard to retain information taught to her. She also struggles when she's given a large amount of information or when multiple instructions are given at a time. So more recently, Jane's parents, they have observed that she gets frustrated easily when it's time for her to complete her homework, and then she would come up with various reasons to excuse herself from that. Okay. Now, in terms of academic support, the next slide. Yeah. So Jane's parents share that Jane had attended a full-day childcare from nursery 1 to kindergarten 2, where phonics was incorporated into the curriculum. She also attended external phonics lesson in kindergarten 1 and 2. So upon entering primary 1, she was placed in an after-school student care where she gets additional help for her school subjects. And she has been attending English group tuition since primary 2 as well. In school, she was placed in a learning support program for English when she was in primary 1 and 2. And since the beginning of this year, she has been attending English remedial lessons. So Jane's teacher, has also highlighted academic concerns to Jane's parent. Specifically, Jane tends to rely heavily on her peers and her teachers to read words and generally shows inconsistent word recognition ability. She also has poor spelling ability and is reluctant to do written work in class. Her teacher also noticed that she often needs instruction to be repeated, quite similar to how is it like at home. Now, because of her literacy difficulties, she was referred for a screening conducted in her school, as mentioned earlier, where results indicated that she was at risk of dyslexia. So Jane's parents, they are confused. What exactly is a screening assessment and how is it different from an assessment? Yeah, does it mean that Jane is already diagnosed with dyslexia after having gone through the screening? Now, a screening assessment is a relatively brief evaluation to determine a child's at-risk level. Okay, this is in contrast to an assessment, which is longer, averaging approximately about 3 hours, and it is able to confirm a diagnosis. Now, compared to an assessment, which requires professional interpretation, the screening results is much easier to interpret. Therefore, it's important to note that results from a screening should not be regarded as a substitute for a more comprehensive assessment. So now that Jane's parents, they're more aware of the difference between a screening and an assessment, they're still in a dilemma. Should they send Jane for an assessment and how can it help them? Now, if we were to use an iceberg as an analogy, what is visible to us is the child's difficulties, right? In the case of Jane, it would be her poor examination results, her reading, her spelling, and her writing difficulties. However, there's a larger portion that's hidden beneath the surface, and that is what an assessment aims to uncover. So apart from being able to ascertain a diagnosis, The assessment provides a comprehensive way to help us understand a child's learning profile and needs by going beyond the surface. We are able to identify the child's strengths and weaknesses and see how it may impact the child's learning. Most importantly, we want to capitalize on the child's strengths and also find ways to work on their weaknesses. Finally, an assessment can also help in educational planning. So like, for instance, in terms of school placement, would a child benefit from being placed in a mainstream school or special ed school? In terms of intervention, like what kind of specialist support does the child need? What are some things that a teacher can do in school? Or how can the parents help the child at home? And also perhaps in terms of assess arrangement, or what is also commonly known as exam accommodations. Okay, next. Now, after hearing about the benefits or importance of assessment, Jane's parents decided to go ahead with an assessment. Yeah, so there are many different kinds of assessments, but based on the information collected from the various sources, as well as the referral concerns, the psychologists decided on a dyslexia assessment. Now, moving on to the assessment of dyslexia. So the assessment of dyslexia involves the investigation of three main areas, namely the cognitive abilities, phonological processing skills, and literacy ability. So let's take a look at what goes on during the assessment of a child's cognitive abilities first. Yeah. So the cognitive assessment is also commonly known as the IQ assessment. In the cognitive assessment, we are not just interested in the IQ score, which is the single score that tells us the overall functioning of the child. What we are interested in is the profile of the child, his strengths and his weaknesses. Yeah. So we examine different areas of intelligence in this area. So first we have the verbal ability. Here we are interested in a child's ability to use language to express thoughts and to reason. So these are vital to academic learning given the linguistic demands involved. So an example of what we would do is to get the child to define meanings of words. So next would be non-verbal reasoning ability. So where we are interested to look at how well a child is able to detect underlying conceptual relationships, identify and apply rules to solve problems. So this is important in tasks that involve problem solving and hypothesis testing, such as in mathematics and science. So for instance, the child would have to select an appropriate figure that completes the missing portion of a grid pattern. Okay. Then we have spatial ability, which looks at how well a child is able to visualize, analyze, and remember spatial relationships. In the context of learning, these abilities can be implicated in abstract mathematics, such as geometry, as well as the interpretation of graphs and maps, for instance. So an example of a task in the assessment would be having the child to use blocks to construct given patterns. Okay. Next, we have working memory, which refers to the ability to register and manipulate both visual and auditory information. So working memory is actually used in tasks such as like computing sums mentally or following a series of instructions. An example of a working memory task would be getting the child to listen to a string of numbers read aloud, and then maybe asking them to recall them in the same order or in the backwards order. Okay. And then finally, we have processing speed, which looks at the speed and accuracy in identifying, processing, and responding to visually presented information. So this has implications on how quickly a child may be able to respond under time conditions, such as a school test or examinations. So to assess for processing speed, we will get the child to indicate the presence or absence of target symbols on a time task. Okay, next. Move on to phonological processing. Now, because research has shown that phonological processing deficits are a hallmark of dyslexia, it is crucial for us to assess it. So what exactly is it, right? So phonological processing refers to the use of phonological information in processing written and oral language. This plays an important role in the development of reading and writing. So in assessing for phonological processing skills, we look at two main areas, phonological awareness and rapid naming ability. Okay, so first we have phonological awareness, which refers to the awareness of sound structure in language and ability to work with sounds in spoken language. So some measures of phonological awareness include an elision test, where the child is required to omit part of a word. Okay, and the next would be the blending word test, where the child would need to blend presented sounds together to form a word. Okay, and then we have substitution, where the child has to replace a phoneme in word with a new phoneme. Right. Okay, and then next will be Pauline.
Okay, thank you, Adeline. So now I will share more about rapid automatized naming, also known as RAN. And this is one of the areas that we would typically assess for when assessing for dyslexia. And basically, we are looking at the student's ability to quickly name aloud a series of familiar items. So these things could be objects, colors, letters, or numbers on a page. And we do this to get a sense of the student's rapid naming speed. And the reason why we assess for RAN is that it shares many processes with reading, such as the speed of retrieving information from memory. And so it serves as a predictor of future reading ability. So students who show weaknesses in RAN often have accompanying difficulties in reading or literacy. Okay. So on this next slide, I will share more about the components of the literacy assessment and some examples as to what the students will be tested on. So as we know, dyslexia is a specific learning difficulty in reading, spelling, and writing. So the main components of the assessment for literacy can be split into two parts, reading and writing. So some of the tests are dependent on age, meaning that some are meant only for younger students, while others can be used with older students. So I will start off first with the reading test. So if you recall, a characteristic feature of dyslexia is difficulty in phonological awareness. And aside from assessing the students' awareness of sounds and their ability to manipulate them, we want to see if they're able to apply this letter sound correspondence knowledge to read nonsense words. So the reason why we use nonsense words is also to see if the student is able to read unfamiliar words instead of possibly guessing and using their prior knowledge, for example, when they are reading real words. So when reading real words, they might have seen those words before and might have memorized them, while for these nonsense words, they are totally new and unfamiliar. So for example, talk and sat are some of the examples of nonsense words that could be given to the student to read. Then we also want to assess the student's accuracy in reading single words. And we do this by showing the students a list of real words, and they just have to read as many of them as they can. Sometimes the assessment of single word reading skills can also include sight word reading fluency, meaning we are looking at the accuracy and speed of reading these words. Then moving on to the next level of reading skills, we have the passage reading fluency. And that's when we are assessing the student's accuracy and speed in reading connected text. So these passages are grade appropriate, meaning that the difficulty of the text that is given to the student is supposed to be within their abilities. Then during this test, we will be able to assess the types of errors that they make, their ability to read words fluently, and whether they are able to comprehend the text at the end of the passage. So most of the time, we will also evaluate the reading prosody of the student, meaning things like intonation, their pacing, whether they have appropriate pausing between phrases and sentences, and the overall phrasing of their passage reading. Then the last component of the reading test is reading comprehension. And we are now looking specifically at the student's ability to understand what they have read. So for the younger students, we often start off with maybe a word or a sentence level, meaning we give them a sentence to read and then ask questions based on what they have read. Then at the passage level, usually for the school-age children, there will be a variety of questions posed, and these can include literal comprehension questions, where the answers are found directly in the passage, as well as inferential comprehension questions, where the students have to infer based on their understanding of what the author has written. So those are the reading tests that make up the literacy assessment. Now let's look at the writing components. So we'll start off first with alphabet writing. And for this component, it is usually given to the younger students, so those perhaps in preschool or lower primary. And typically, we are looking at their ability to write letters of the alphabet, such as their speed and accuracy in writing them. And we'll also look at their knowledge of this alphabet sequence, so whether they are able to sequence from A to Z correctly, and also the actual formation of the letter. So whether they're able to form the letters correctly in uppercase and lowercase. Then we have single word spelling, which is basically the student's accuracy in spelling single words. Usually these words are given in context, meaning that the spelling word is read out in a sentence and the student has to spell that specific word. And then the next level from single word spelling is sentence writing. So we are looking at the student's sentence formation skills. So how we assess this is by getting the student to form their own sentences using keywords. And also there's a component that is more similar to synthesis, and we get the student to combine 2 or 3 sentences into one sentence. So basically, we are looking at assessing the student's knowledge of semantics, which is their understanding of meanings of words. And we are also assessing their grammar skills and other writing conventions, like whether they're using appropriate capitalization and punctuation. Then lastly, we also have essay writing, which is usually only given to older students. And similarly, we are also assessing their knowledge of semantics, grammar, writing conventions. But in this case, we are looking at the context of a composition. So the students will be given a topic and they are expected to write a short essay about a given topic. Yeah, so we are also wanting to see how they organize their thoughts, whether they are able to structure their writing well as well. Okay. For younger students, we may do an informal writing task where we show the student a picture and then we get them to write about it. Okay. So now I hope you have a better understanding of the various components that go into an assessment for dyslexia at the DAS. Through these various assessment components, we'll have a more comprehensive understanding of the student's profile. Okay, so now coming back to Jane, whom we have met earlier. So at this point, Jane has completed the assessment, and now we want to see how she has performed and also look at some of the recommendations that can be made to support Jane. So at the DAS, we typically put all the assessment results into a technical appendix that is attached to the end of the assessment report. So we will look at breaking down the various components in the technical appendix. Okay, so let's look at Jane's technical appendix here. So we will start off first with the cognitive assessment performance. And so there are various cognitive assessment tools out there in the market currently. And for the case of Jane, we use the tool that is known with local population, meaning that we're comparing her performance with same-age children in Singapore. And this table shows Jane's overall performance on the core clusters of this tool. Okay, so when we look at this table, what we are looking out for is the standard score with its accompanying description level. And there's an overall score here, the General Conceptual Ability Score, GCA, and that tells us Jane's overall cognitive ability. Okay, so this GCA score is made up of the three main cluster scores, the verbal, non-verbal reasoning, and spatial ability. Okay, so Jane attained an overall GCA score of 94 and her performance is within the average range, meaning that compared to her same-age peers, she is performing on par and she should be able to pick up new skills and concepts as expected of her age. Okay, but given her profile here, we can also look at the specific cluster performances to get a better idea of her abilities. Okay, so we can see that at the top here, the first cluster, the verbal ability, is actually below average for age, meaning that compared to other children, she is slightly weaker in terms of her verbal expression ability. So there are two subtests that make up this cluster. So the first is word definitions, which looks at her vocabulary knowledge, and the other one is nonverbal similarities, which looks at her verbal reasoning ability. And so overall, this is an area that Jane is weaker at, and it tells us that she may benefit from additional exposure to the language. Okay, but despite her weaknesses in the verbal ability, Jane's other non-verbal reasoning ability and the spatial ability are actually age appropriate, and she's got within the average range, meaning that compared to her peers, she's actually performing on par. Okay. So if you recall, the cognitive assessment will also comprise the assessment of working memory and processing speed. And these are often areas of weaknesses identified in a dyslexic learner profile. So as for how Jane performed, she actually showed generally weak verbal memories, where she scored below average to low, within the below average to low ranges on tests of verbal short-term memory, which is the recall of digits forwards task, as well as tests of verbal working memory, which is the recall of digits backwards task. Yeah. So Jane also showed very slow processing speed, and she performed within the low range on the speed of information processing test. So what happened during the test was that Jane was asked to make some quantitative comparisons quickly. So we want to see how quickly she can process information. And for Jane, she did not make any errors, but she was just generally slower and needed more time to process and complete tasks. Okay, so which then resulted in a poor score. So compared to other children her age, she'll probably need more time to process and also to remember information. So now let's look at Jane's phonological processing profile, which comprises the RAN and the phonological awareness components. So as you can see, Jane scored within the average range on the rapid symbolic naming composite, meaning that her rapid naming speed is age appropriate. But when we look at her phonological awareness, we can see that it's significantly poorer than her peers. and she scored within the very poor range, which suggests that she has significant weaknesses in her ability to manipulate and work with sounds. So across the various components, Jane showed difficulties with blending and deleting sounds, as well as in identifying individual sounds with words. So given her weaknesses in her phonological awareness, it was not unexpected that Jane has weaknesses in her reading skills. We can see that across all the components of the decoding and reading subtests, Jane actually scored within the below average to very low range. Yeah. So this tells us that she has generally weak to very weak reading and phonological decoding skills. Okay. So the next slide will detail some of the errors that she made. For decoding, she had difficulties in decoding short single-syllable nonsense words. So for example, this word, she read it as rap, which shows that she may have some confusion regarding her short vowel sound. And as for the real words, Jane tended to substitute the given words with similar-looking words, or even making some letter reversals, such as reading bear as door. And when reading passages, she replaced the phrases entirely, which then changed the meaning of the sentences and also the meaning of the story. And so this will also affect her comprehension of the text. Okay. So now let's look at Jane's writing performance. So similar to her performance on the reading task, she showed generally weak to very weak spelling and writing skills here. So in particular, Jane struggled to spell most of the words on the spelling task, which then affected the comprehensibility of her writing on the sentence writing and the composition writing task. Okay. So compared to most children her age, Jane was falling behind in terms of spelling and her writing skills. So we also got Jane to complete an informal writing task where she was given a picture and then asked to write a few sentences about it. So here's a sample of Jane's writing. And as you can see, she made many spelling errors, and some of her spelling errors are also for common words, such as boy, where she reversed the B and wrote doy instead. She also made capitalization errors and mixed uppercase and lowercase letters in her sentences. And she also did not capitalize the first letter of a sentence. So with her spelling errors here, it will also be hard to guess what she was trying to convey. So for example, the second sentence, Jane was trying to write that the boy is throwing rocks to the lions, which you might not be able to guess if you are not told what she was trying to write. Okay. So overall, through this assessment, weaknesses have been observed in several areas of Jane's profile. So she showed weaknesses in her verbal ability, verbal memories and processing speed, phonological awareness, as well as across most areas of literacy tested. So when we take these results in context with Jane's background profile, as well as the reported concerns, we do have enough evidence to conclude that Jane's difficulties are unexpected and they fit the criteria of a diagnosis of dyslexia. Okay. So with the information gathered through the assessment process, we now have a better idea of Jane's areas of strengths and weaknesses and are now at a better position to make recommendations that will fit her profile. Okay. So one of the recommendations for Jane includes the need for her to receive specialized literacy intervention. So at the DAS, we offer a small group literacy program for children with dyslexia, which is called the DAS Mean Literacy Program. Or if the students require more individualized one-to-one support, the DAS International also provides specialist tutoring. So aside from specialized literacy intervention, which really targets the weaknesses in her literacy skills, given Jane's difficulties, she might also need more time to think and process information that's given to her. And when we take into context her dyslexic difficulties, she may benefit from having extra time for examinations in school. So what this extra time provides is perhaps allowing Jane more time to think and formulate her answers, as well as allow her more time to check through her work when she has completed the paper. So with this access arrangement, she's less disadvantaged due to her learning difficulty, and she's better able to demonstrate her knowledge. Okay. So some school accommodations might be helpful as well for Jane's teachers to implement in a classroom. So these can include things like breaking down instructions for Jane and perhaps checking on Jane's understanding and progress more regularly in class, and make sure that she's able to follow along in class. So given her difficulties, perhaps giving her more time to complete her class assignments or even allowing her to bring them home to complete them if she's not able to finish them within the class period will be helpful as well. Okay, so continued understanding, support from the teachers, as well as the special educational needs officer in school will also be helpful. Okay. So given that Jane has weaknesses in her language skills, increased exposure to good quality English programs might be helpful. Continuing to encourage her to read a variety of texts, such as books, magazines, or articles, will be good because we want to increase exposure to words and to let her know how they are read and pronounced. So Jane's parents can also make use of audiobooks or ebooks to increase exposure to text. So through the assessment, we also saw that Jane had difficulties in reading and spelling many common sight words for her age. So her parents and tutor could perhaps focus on increasing her exposure to those sight words. Perhaps they can also introduce and practice regularly with Jane a few words from the sight words list, for example, like a dodge word list. And it doesn't have to be too many at one go. So for example, they can just do 2 to 3 new words every few days. And this will be helpful in building up her sight words knowledge over time. So through the assessment, we also know that Jane had some unfamiliarity in her knowledge of vowels. So her parents and tutors can also be more explicit in teaching her in those areas. Similarly, for letter reversals, some ways to help Jane remember the difference between B and D is perhaps having her put 2 thumbs up and teach her that the left thumbs up is a B, while the right thumbs up is a D. So that she can be regularly reminded to do a quick check of her hands when she's writing or when she's confused. Okay. So for writing, her parents and teachers can also teach her more explicitly the writing conventions. So perhaps breaking it down step by step or working on one area at a time. So maybe starting with learning how to capitalize the first letter of the sentence and then moving on to include ending punctuation and so on. Okay. Lastly, based on Jane's profile, so aside from weaknesses in her language and literacy skills, she also showed weaknesses in her working memory and processing speed. So some strategies that can be made for working memory include things like trying to incorporate as many senses as possible when teaching, so meaning using multi-sensory methods to help Jane remember information. Adults can also help to break information down for Jane so that she can learn them in chunks or can remember them in chunks. Using visualization techniques as well may be helpful to help her remember the information better. So as for slow processing speed, Jane will benefit from having more time to process information, and adults can help to break down tasks for her. And for children with slower processing speed in general, we can also help them to be more automatic at routine tasks. And this will cut down the time that they need to be constantly processing to know what to do next. So for Jane, her parents can work through with her some routines that she does daily and help her to build her organization and time management skills. So to round things off, after the assessment has been completed, Jane's parents and teachers now have a better understanding of her cognitive and literacy profile, which then helps them to provide targeted support in school and at home. Jane also receives specialized literacy support, which then helps to boost her confidence and her skills in reading, spelling, and writing. So as a result of these support and understanding from the people around her, Jane is now much better at coping in school and coping with her academics. And she's also more willing to attempt tasks, and her confidence has improved over time. Okay. So that's mainly what I have for the case of Jane.
Okay, yeah, so that's for Jane, who shows obvious literacy difficulties. But what if a child exhibits, other areas of difficulties? So here we have an overview of what we assess at the DAS. So not only do we assess for dyslexia, we are also able to conduct assessment for other learning difficulties, such as dyscalculia, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, as well as autism spectrum disorder. So for more information, you can refer to the DAS website. Yeah. So for parents and caregivers, who prefer a shorter processing time, they can consider pursuing an assessment under the DAI Concierge Assessment Service. Okay, right. So with that, we've come to the end of the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Pearline and Adeline.
Yes, that was wonderful and very comprehensive. I mean, as a parent who's had 3 of her children assessed, yeah,
I wish I had both of you next to me
yeah.
when I got my son's diagnosis of dyslexia, and I'm looking at his report and I'm like, all right, what is all this? You know, I like the way you all had really chunk it down, breaking it down into layman terms.
Yes.
And most of our parents really have not gone for a degree in psychology. Yeah, so I do welcome this input from you guys. Deborah?
Yeah, because the appendix, the technical part of an assessment, I mean, getting an assessment report is a significant document. And the technical part at the back is also challenging to understand when you're not a psychologist. So the breakdown was very good. So thank you very much for that. But I know I keep on going back to my assessment and the recommendations. Actually, the assessment recommendations for my kids led to their careers. So we looked at what they were good at. So we knew that this was something that was going to work for them. Obviously, I mean, you mentioned a word there that was very important, automaticity, being able to automatize things. So they're never forgetting, but, you know, I mean, I don't think I'm in a dream world when that's always going to happen for everything, but it does happen for important things. Yeah, and then, yeah, so understanding that report is really important, not only for a parent, but for an educator. So it's something that really is a very valuable resource, in knowing how to support a child. So thank you very much.
I think also, just to add, Deborah, that it's like, if a parent can maybe understand a bit more the psychological report and a lot of highlights into their, I would say, strengths.
Yes.
We always dwell on their challenges and their challenges, but when I read through many reports that I receive from you guys and the parents want support, and before I talk to them, I always try and look at their strengths.
Yeah.
When I'm talking to a parent, so that sometimes parents or educators may forget that this individual has a lot of strengths that maybe we are not, you know, focusing or encouraging even, right? When they are so focused on what they can't do, but what can they do and how to expand, like Deb says, a lot of it led to her children's gifts and done really, really well.
Yeah, it does. It does make a difference, because you have to decide relatively early, actually, you know, what subjects do they want to take? Because I mean, when they go to school, they've got to get through school, right? And they've got to be able to do it well enough to be able to go into higher education. And so a lot of decisions can be made very early. I know I did that with my son, because he's, you know, he has the talent, his spatial ability is like 99%. So he's very good at design technology. So surprising, he's a design technology teacher today.
Right.
So yeah, anyway, we do have some questions here.
Yeah, we do. Can
we start with this one? Jane's percentile is based on her cohort level. Is that for Jane's birth year, or is there an average?
In general, when we do the comparison if we are basing it on the technical appendix report, we are using the child's, comparing the child's performance with their same age peers. So we're going by the year, sometimes down to the month. So every 3 months, for example, if your child is 9 years and 3 months old, then we are comparing really with the 9 years, 3 months old group. Yeah. I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, I have I think the questions are coming in quite fast and furious. There's a question that was asked. Sometimes I can tell that my child is struggling, but I don't know exactly why. How can a psychologist support me in determining which assessment I need to seek? And actually, that question is really, really very good, because I just received an inquiry yesterday from a parent who was saying the child is diagnosed with dyslexia and they really don't know what to do now, like, you know. Yeah, so maybe Pauline or Adeline can help with the answer.
Right. So it seems more like the child is having a lot of difficulties and the parents are unsure which assessment to go for. I think it's quite common. Sometimes parents come to us and it's like, oh, the child seems to be showing difficulties across many different areas. So I think what would be important is maybe to speak to a psychologist also first. And then through the interview question, you'll be able to ask parents, really right now, what is your main area of concern for the child? Is it the attention or is it the literacy? You know, if your main concern is really more literacy, then perhaps you might want to go ahead with maybe a dyslexia assessment first, right? And then during the assessment, we'll also be able to observe the child. So if we see that the child really does show some behavioral concern or attention concerns that it seems like interfering with his behavior, and taking into account the prior concern that the parents already have with regards to attention, right? Then probably we might, at the end of the assessment, we might recommend maybe, do you want to go ahead to do another assessment to maybe assess for attention? So I think what's most important is right now, as of now, what is your main area of concern? Yeah, I think that would help in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and we okay, that's I would take that into consideration as well when I speak with a parent. I have a question as well on how can we help kids with there's a question here, how to help kids with dysgraphia, right? So the child has a diagnosis of dysgraphia, and this is really a case that I recently, along with my specialist teacher, we met up with the school because the parent gave the feedback that the child never brings back any work that is written, that's got writing on it, written down and all, Yeah. And so there was this big discussion with the teacher and the parents. So maybe you can give some insights, into dysgraphia, because a lot of times we're looking at dyslexia and this child can actually read really well. It's reading at quite a high level, but the writing is not on par with his reading. Yeah.
For dysgraphia, it's mainly the writing, like you mentioned, will be affected. So a lot of times, what would be most helpful would be to work on that motor skill, which then the support will come from an occupational therapist to strengthen the child's fine motor skills, the way they approach a writing task, for example. But there can be other accommodations that can be given to the child. Perhaps if the school is able to allow the child to type out his or her answers or worksheets.
Bring that up.
Yeah, then that would be helpful. I mean, it will cut down a lot of that difficulty in even trying to get the child to attempt the task.
I think some we did broach that typing and all. I think it's the mindset, maybe the mindset, and even that we need to write.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
skill of writing.
we are so digitally connected these days that we rarely write. Well, we expect our kids to do exams.
Our kids to write, but
and then we have to sit exams and write. Oh my goodness, it's a hard task. Even as an adult, sitting at an exam and having to write. Oh my goodness, that's tough. Yeah. Anyway, okay. I know. My son had difficulty writing, so he ended up getting the accommodation to use a laptop, and he did exams with laptops. So, that's how he was successful. So here's our feedback form. If you'd like to give us some feedback, we always like to see how we can improve, and also what subjects you'd like to hear from in the future.
Yeah, that's right.
So yes, we'd love to hear your feedback. And actually there's a course on from DAS Academy, and it's on educational psychology. Here we go. And so this is a very interesting course, very good for educators so they can understand the reports that come into them, because the parents get these reports and educators are able to interpret them and how they can put the recommendations into place.
Okay.
So that's that. There's that course there for educators and parents too, because I know as a parent I had to read through reports. It's very tough. You need a lot of help. Yeah.
Well, so we've come to the end of our we really want to make it short and sweet.
Yes, and so you can get on. And
We want to come back for more
Yeah.
and maybe grab a bit of lunch if you haven't already. So thank you everyone in Singapore and overseas for attending our talk.
Yeah,
today.
and then we'll see you next one, which will be in about 3 months' time.
That's right. And we hope you've really been you've really enjoyed and gained some useful insights for your own or professional experience.
And so we will also put the video up on the DAS website as well.
Okay.
So you always have the resource available to you, and our previous webinars are also available on YouTube as well as on our DAS International website.
Yeah.
So there's a huge amount of resources there available to you.
So once again, have a good day, everyone, and thank you.
Thank you, Adeline and Pauline. That was wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Bye.